Okay. All right. Well, here we are. This is the Mood Disorder Support and Education Group. Once again, reintroducing ourselves. This is a group that is normally based out of the Triangle area of North Carolina. Presently, we are in location in California. This group is based on the National Alliance of Mental Illness model, trying to just bring information for clients, for patients, for family members, clinicians, people who love people with mood disorders, because it affects all of us. And there's all kinds of things that are symptomatic that might fall under the umbrella of mood disorders. Today, what we're going to talk about is the biology of trauma and how it affects mood disorders. And that would be anxiety, depression, ADHD, insomnia, even like psychosis. Like it can affect everything related to our moods and symptoms, relationships, all kinds of things like that. So this is Carla Naragon. And Carla Naragon and I have known each other for a long time. And I think I'll reveal at another point when we get to questions and answers a little bit to you guys. I'll reveal how we know each other. But for this recording, I'm going to let us know in this recording that we've just known each other a really long time. And Carla has been extremely helpful with me professionally in case consultations. And so since I was out here, I thought it would be really nice to let you speak directly. So hey, everybody, we're recording the session right now. So just come on in and we'll have some questions and answers at the end of this session. So Carla, how did you get into studying a little bit about trauma? Maybe talk a little bit about that. Why is that an area that's of interest to you in your clinical work?
Well, you know, I believe that if you find a way to climb out of the deep, dark hell that you're in, then you kind of have a duty to help other people, or at least I felt like I did. So when I started this work as a baby therapist, an intern, I started working with victims of rape, incest, and torture. And what I discovered very quickly is that I really needed to understand PTSD if I was going to help anybody and if I was going to survive my career choice. And at the time, I had some options. I had EMDR and somatic experiencing, and I tried both. And I really liked somatic experiencing because I felt like it had a broader range of tools so that you could really meet people where they're at. I really like that. And the methodology is based on observing animals in the wild and how they face life and death situations multiple times a day, and they're not traumatized. Animals in a lab behave more like human beings do. So, so can I tell the bunny story?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to tell you a story about a bunny, and I promise it has a point. Hang with me. So I want you to imagine a cute, adorable, fluffy bunny just hanging out in the forest, eating grass, and it's a beautiful day like today, and the sun is shining, and there's a little babbling brook, and it's great, and all of a sudden the bunny hears this really loud sound. So the autonomic nervous system immediately goes into orientation. We're not in fight, flight, or freeze. We're just in, that could be a tree branch or it could be a coyote, I don't know. So what happens instantly for the bunny is that the eyes get big and the ears get big, the mouth opens, the nose flares. The animal is sensing its environment 360. And sure enough, it's a coyote. So the nervous system switches from orientation into flight. The nervous system has three choices: fight, flight, and freeze. And it's not that we make that choice. There's a lot of people that are very ashamed of how they respond to threat, when in actuality, it's your nervous system that chooses based on the information it has on what your best chance of survival is. Well, you know, bunnies are prey animals, so most of the time that choice is flight. So instantly, the animal is just filled with rocket fuel. which means adrenaline and cortisol and blood is being pushed to the major muscles. And that bunny just takes off like a shot. And it's running and running and running on rocket fuel and running and running and running, dodging around trees, and it's leaping over boulders, and it sees its favorite little hidey hole right over there, and it leaps and it dives and it's safe. Now, the moment the animal has the felt sense of safety, again, perceiving that felt sense of safety, what goes up now gets to come down. So what goes up was all of that primal survival energy. Hooray, we're not lynched today. We're safe. And now we discharge. So the bunny will start to shake and tremble and cry and vomit and shit. And it's really gross. But the bunny doesn't know it's gross. That's the beauty of it. It surrenders to the release of that energy. And then it hops out and eats more grass like nothing ever happened. Here's what we do. Now, we're capable of the same thing, but here's what we are capable of doing that the bunny is not. Bunny doesn't do this. Oh my God, this is so embarrassing. I don't have time for this. I have to go to the grocery store. I have to pick up the kids. You know what? Big bunnies don't cry. So suck it up. Put a smile on your face. And oh, by the way, you better be grateful that you're alive, and just knock it off right now and stop complaining. And you hop out that door right now and just deal with your life. Bunny doesn't do that. Now, this is a great example that fits with the statement that trauma is in the body. It's not in the event. Mm-hmm. When we, and I'm not dissing modern culture. I like that I can walk down the street and for the most part, I'm safe. And, you know, people stop when they see a stop sign and blah, blah, blah. Those are all good things. But what's happened in our culture, I think, my perception is that we only honor a certain range of emotion. And if we display anything outside of what is acceptable, we get shamed. And what that shame does is it teaches us that we are only lovable. And by lovable, I mean safe. We'll get food and shelter and community and all those things. We only get those things if we're accepted by the community. So what we do, unfortunately, what do you call it? A side effect of our wonderful civilization is, a bad side effect, is that we learn to retain those feelings. So let's say that something happens, like a car accident, and you get really shaken up over it, and everybody tells you after you survive, it's okay, stop crying here, you know, I'll put a blanket around you. People try to make you stop. And it comes from a very loving place. Unfortunately, one of the artifacts of that stopping is that what goes up doesn't get to come down. And so now you've got a sensation in your body of constriction, and it's going to be paired with whatever else your other senses are picking up, like the time of day, or the weather, or who's with you, or, you know, colors, what color and model the car was, and, you know, who knows what you're perceiving. And now you've got that little tiny thing of ick inside. Ick. And as time goes on, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then pretty much if anything touches that little ball, you know, the affect that you feel, the mood, the feeling, the physical sensation, all of that stuff, it's much bigger than what the present situation is calling for. So in my worldview, that's unresolved trauma. Mm-hmm. And I also like to say in the universe according to me, because if you ask 5 therapists one question, you will get 50 million different answers. And they're all true on some level. And there are many flavors of ice cream and many ways of believing. So in the universe, according to me, you cannot undo history. Once the glass is shattered, you cannot unshatter it. But here's what you can do. You can begin to call those dissociated aspects of yourself back home. And what that means is this. We can begin to release the emotional charge that is attached to those memories. So for instance, I'm sure we're all familiar with the term flashback. something happens and you have a flashback, and it's like the thing in the past that happened is happening right now. It's like it's haunting you. So my approach to this is, if we can release the residual emotions, if you can tolerate in small amounts, and you don't go digging for these things, they just kind of, when they come, and I want to talk about that too. You know what, and I'm all over the place, I apologize. But I promise in the end it will make sense. I want you to remember that the bunny did not shake and tremble and cry until it felt safe. And so sometimes we don't have a flashback. What we have is we feel safe, our nervous system takes its foot off the brake, and all of a sudden we get flooded with feelings. And because we don't know where they come from, we slam them back down. When we find a really good therapist or someone that's helping, anybody that's helping, and they make you feel safe, the way that you work with unresolved trauma is, when you feel safe and you notice feelings start to come, you work with them. You provide containment so that what goes up can begin to slowly come down. And in my universe, that's the remedy. And when you begin to release the unresolved pain, and gosh, I mean, we could spend hours defining what that might look like. It's different for everybody. But when you start to release that unresolved pain, the memories take their rightful place in the back of your mind back here, instead of popping up and scaring you. So to me, that's what good trauma work is. And you know, there's trauma in the body, and there's traumatic events. I feel like it's good to define that. And sometimes people will say there's trauma with a big T and trauma with a little t. And what that means is, like, trauma with a big T is surviving a hurricane, or getting raped, or something, you know, grandiose. The thing to remember about that is that your nervous system cannot tell the difference. Your nervous system really does not care about the story. So I'm not a big fan of saying big T and little t. I think that everybody on this planet walks around with unresolved trauma, because the world we live in is loud and sharp and pointy. And the culture we live in does not respect the full range of emotion. So that equation kind of sets us up to internalize pain. And that's really all that trauma is. It's internalized pain that gathers dust like a dust bunny every time something happens. It's a lot of talking.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that shows up as a question is this term resilience.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
For sure.
Tyson.
Yeah. Okay. So there's this old story, I think it's from the 70s, about this lunatic that kidnapped a school bus full of kids and drove it to a rock quarry and basically buried the bus with the kids. This has a happy ending, so don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was interesting because, and it's a good example because, some of the children responded to the inescapable attack by freezing. And that's nature's way of protecting animals in the wild from being wide awake and alert while you're being ripped apart and eaten for lunch. Human beings are predator and prey animals both. So some of the kids went into this freeze response, which means they just dissociated, they curled up, and they couldn't move. There was one kid, though, that was so resilient that he believed that he could save himself. And so he went into a fight response, and he started, you know, bashing the windows open and digging the rocks out and finding a way out. And when he tried to help some of the other kids, some of them could come, but some of them were so frozen they couldn't move. That kid is a great example of resilience. When we are taught when we're young that it's safe to be angry, it's safe to be sad, it's safe to be happy. In fact, all emotions are no big deal. We become resilient because those emotions are just like lights on a dashboard. They're just a part of our survival package. So when we allow feelings to move through us, we become more resilient, we're more flexible, so we can respond to what's going on around us. Someone who grew up in a really rigid environment can function well under certain circumstances, but if anything changes, they freak out because their nervous system is rigid and less resilient. Some of my clients are like 6'4", people who got out of prison, and you don't cry and you don't, whatever. And there's this belief that crying makes you weak. And the paradox is that it actually sets you free.
Right.
Crying makes you more resilient. Crying is your body's way of releasing, or at least it's one of your body's ways of releasing, which makes you more resilient. And when you're resilient, it just means that you can be relaxed, you can think on your feet, and you have permission to respond to your environment.
Yeah. That's what I really like as a sort of working hopefulness. So even if terrible things have happened, that there's this place that there can be a repair and a building,
Yeah.
and still living a full and meaningful life, even with some of that, like, psychological wound, that there's still this place that there's not a limitation.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah.
So I want to say that one of the reasons why people like Cindy and I have jobs is that the coping skills that worked great in childhood are generally awful in adulthood.
Yeah.
And it's not the coping skills fault. It's just that, the Buddha says, the root of human suffering is in our attachment to things staying the same in a world that's constantly changing. So how does this tie in with what I was trying to say? Oh yes, coping skills. We don't want to cut out and remove parts of ourselves that we don't like. It's not possible. And when you try, it causes more damage. The way that you become more resilient is by honoring whatever you did to survive, whatever you did to get to this place. So you have psychological wounds, of course. The planet is loud and sharp and pointy. But shaming yourself for your wound and treating it as if it's toxic and needs to be cut out and removed actually solidifies the problem. It's like feeding the cancer. Does that make sense?
Mm.
So the remedy is to be kind and loving to the parts of yourself that you love to hate.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Wow. Yeah. I had expressed that way, but I do get a sense of expanding resilience being something of an expansion of a larger context.
Well, the way that I'd like to think about it is this: if you add love to a problem, the outcome is going to be way better than if you add shame and hatefulness and resentment. So can I give an image?
Yeah.
So here's an image. Imagine a round table, and at this table are 5 kids being served dinner by their mother. Now, one of these kids is a straight A student and feels really guilty if they were to like accidentally not pay for something when they walk out of the grocery store. One kid waits until everybody's asleep and then rifles through everybody's wallet. One kid might be a drug addict. One kid might be a superstar. They're all different. In fact, and the mom might have a hard time liking some. She may like some of her kids more because some of them are more likable. But her job as a parent is to give love and respect to every single kid at that table. Now, not every kid is going to get car keys or a credit card, but everybody gets love and respect and compassion. And this is a good model for how we need to treat ourselves. Yeah. That's it.
Right. Well, to circle back in a broad bridge way, you're talking about trauma and the biology of trauma, maybe how some people might experience trauma more than the average bear, right? Sort of pre-existing.
You want to go from one extreme to another?
Yeah.
So starting at the most awful?
well, not necessarily in story, but just what is it that happens where an event might occur, one person experiences it and bounces back and the other doesn't, or mood disorder shows up later with one person and not another. I'm very curious about that.
Well, when you say that, it prompts me to talk about dissociation.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And when dissociation is a product of dissociation is not a bad thing.
Right.
It's a good thing. There's a threat and you're in an altered state and you survive, and then you come back to neutral. Dissociation can sometimes get stuck in the on position when you don't let what goes up to come down. And so sometimes what the mind will do is it will actually create different aspects of self to handle different situations.
Okay.
How does this tie into your question? I fell down a hole. I got a little lost.
I mean, it's more general about bad things happen to people.
Yes.
For some people, mood symptoms follow
Oh,
at different degrees.
Okay, this is a gestalt.
Yeah.
A gestalt means the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The question you're asking is not a simple addition, subtraction, linear equation.
Right.
It's a gestalt. So number one, to be human means to be a gestalt of a mind, a body, and a spirit.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that.
Language of the mind is thought and belief system. Language of the body is sensation. Language of the spirit is emotion. That's one way to think about it. And when everything is integrated and accepted, then we can be very present. Okay, so training is one piece of the puzzle, but then there's another piece of the puzzle. There are genetics. In my family, and I take Zoloft, and I have been taking it for like 20 plus years, and I wish I'd had it sooner. Just to explain how it works, would that be helpful?
Sure, a little bit.
Okay, so here's a biological component to a mood disorder. In a normal brain that is not mine, there's two neurons. There's a pitcher and a catcher, and this neuron shoots serotonin to this guy. This guy gives the brain a little bath, and then this guy takes whatever's left back. Well, in my brain and in my family's brains, there's a genetic history. What happens is this guy shoots serotonin to this guy, and before this guy has a chance to sprinkle any in the head, it just takes it right back.
Oh.
So no matter how much chocolate I eat, my brain gets no serotonin. And without serotonin, there are serious psychological consequences. It's kind of like diabetes. You wouldn't tell somebody to get over it. You would give them their medicine.
Right.
So in some brains, there's just a genetic factor for chemical misfires. That's one part. Another part is, if you do need a mood stabilizing medication, the best thing to do is get a good evaluation and figure out what meds you need to be on. But the meds don't fix it. The meds allow you to show up and do the work that you need to do. There's also, in addition to a genetic portion, there's transgenerational trauma. So I'm descendant from a very long line of paranoid, persecuted Jews who think people are trying to kill them because at some point they were. But even after my ancestors reach a place of safety, the nervous system is still responding with anxiety and fear and paranoia. And that gets passed down through if you've got a nervous, anxious, depressed parent raising their kid, and the child is mirroring those qualities, that's how that gets passed down from one generation to the next.
Right.
So that's another puzzle piece. So there's a genetic piece, there's a family piece, but then there's also free will. You have free will. You can choose to change the equation of your life by participating in therapy, reading books, talking to mentors, not dementors, to mentors. Did I answer the question?
Yeah.
Oh, thank God.
I think there's also just some validation that it's a lot more complex than maybe our culture is beginning to open up and see the bigger picture. And authors like Peter Levine, speaking about how this is, just part of what does it mean to be a human being,
Yeah.
and that people don't have character flaws because they're struggling. So even with something that would seem to be a smaller event and it hitting somebody and they're having a need for more help, that it's not because they're less than, it's just because the human body has strengths and weaknesses. So we just help each other.
Oh, and there's another component too.
What's that?
Well, the changeback response. So let's say you've been living with a mood disorder and you have family and friends and you're a part of a community, and everybody recognizes that you have a problem, and everybody wants you to go to treatment, and they want you to get the help that you need because they love you, which is great. But the thing is that treatment changes you. When you work with whatever medicine you're working with and you start responding to life in a different way, it works like a thermostat. Thermostat's set to 68 degrees. If it gets hot, the air kicks on. If it gets cold, the heat kicks on. And families have a thermostat.
Oh, right.
So if somebody is used to me being depressed and cranky all the time, and I've suddenly found a way to heal my nervous system and I'm feeling better, I'm interacting with people differently, you would think everybody would be super happy about that. And intellectually they are. But now everybody's out of a job. They know what to do with you when you're depressed, but they don't have any idea what to do with you when you're happy and you don't have any problems. So the changeback response is an unconscious drive to reach homeostasis. And what that means is just to get the thermostat set to what we're comfortable with. The changeback response can be temporary. So there's a couple of choices. Sometimes if you come from a family that is uncomfortable with success and is only comfortable with dealing with problems, you might get outed from the tribe because they don't know what to do with you. If you have some flexible, wise people that are willing to deal with their own responses, because if you show up happy when you've been showing up depressed for the last X amount of years, well, now they have to deal with what's inside of them in order to connect with you. So they have free will too. And so it depends on their resiliency. So unfortunately, sometimes when I'm working with somebody who is an abuse survivor and they want to get help, sometimes they get kicked out of their families. And, you have choices. You either go back to being the depressed thing that you were so that you don't have to leave the family, or you make a decision that you want to live a better life. And some people may not know what to do with you and they may disappear. And sometimes you just don't have any good options and you have to pick the best one.
Wow. I think about that as a side branch to just in general, and we've talked about mood disorders in the past, that sometimes if you're dealing with a severe version of a mood disorder, anxiety or bipolar or any element that's taken you out of the game of functioning, that there's kind of maybe a rally around that and the family gets very, very involved. And then when you start to get better and you start to kind of have your own opinion about things, the family will be like, no, you don't have it in you. You're not trustworthy. We need to take care of you. And that's a big thing that we've talked about in terms of pulling the family in on, yes, sometimes people have symptom, relapse, or they need extra help, but not all the time. And to be able to have a communication about that rather than, I'm sorry, you have this, and so you're never going to be able to function on your own. It's like, no, I'm an autonomous capable human being, sometimes I need help, and just to have much more frank conversations about that.
Which means that if somebody's made a job out of caring for you because you are considered disabled and you're no longer disabled,
Yeah.
well, that person's out of a job now.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't have any purpose, and they might have to face their own stuff.
You know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So if you're the identified patient and suddenly you don't need to be a patient anymore, well, everybody else is going to look way sicker than they used to.
Right. Well, to be able to come to understanding in terms of bad things that happen to us,
Mhm.
and how some people have more intense reaction,
Yeah.
or it takes them longer to recover,
Oh,
right? So there's that part in terms of the biology. There's the biology of the family.
I don't want to lose the thread, so let me talk about that.
Go ahead.
I think that there is a huge correlation between high IQ and mood disorders.
Wow.
And this is why I think that. I think that all IQ is our ability to perceive. So if we're somebody with really good hearing and really good vision, and we can see patterns of behavior and we perceive what's going on around us, that can be really overwhelming. And if we're not prepared to deal with how loud the world is, we can develop a mood disorder.
Yeah, it's another form. You're right. You're right.
And so if it's any comfort at all, I do think that one of the downsides of having a very high IQ, of being very bright, is that you see more and you feel more than the average person.
Yeah. I mean, we're covering a lot of ground in terms of these topics. They're very broadly cross-cutting. And actually, we in this series have not done a direct discussion about trauma, like what is trauma, when is it not trauma, not just bad events, but the response, like you're saying, it's how the body interprets, and then how the body may be able to better recover, or how the family system might support that recovery. And all of those aspects equal, either whether mood symptoms show up, or they can more quickly be resolved, whether someone's been encouraged to take medicine to help, right? There's all of these factors that are part of human distress, and to normalize it.
Yeah.
To normalize it, and then really kind of look at why does this keep happening? Well, because there's complicated pieces, but we can break it down and do the parts that we can. So I would like you to maybe come back a little bit and talking about some of the effectiveness of the work that you've done with clients who've come to you specifically to address trauma.
Okay.
Let's talk about the hopefulness about it.
So yeah, absolutely. The first thing in dealing with trauma is to approach somebody with respect. You've got to meet people where they're at. Yeah. Show up. You may be, I've had many clients that come in and say, okay, I'm putting on my seatbelt. Go ahead and just do whatever you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. So teaching people how to meet themselves where they're at. Sometimes less is more.
Yeah.
Okay. Hope. It's so hard to talk about because there are so many moving pieces. So I'm trying to think of a case study, a case history. All right. So can I use a vignette as an example?
That'd be great.
All right. So I had somebody come in who had been raped at a bar. Somebody had slipped her drugs, and she woke up covered in vomit, and she, her body hurt, and it turned out that she had been drugged. And so she was having flashbacks, and what are flashbacks? A flashback would be even though you're in a safe place, suddenly you might feel attacked. You might get flooded with feelings. You get flooded with fear. You don't want to leave the house. You don't want to get out of bed. You keep ruminating about the experience that you had. So the first step is really just normalizing whatever experience you're having. Here's the hope. This person did have this person was also a therapist, and they were having a hard time getting back to work. And at the end of this story, they were able to get back to work. So we normalize, and here's the next part. For some people, crying and feeling out of control is against the law for them. Yeah. And you can't heal from trauma if you're not allowed to feel anything, if you have to suck it up. Right. And so another piece of the pie, and that in working with this woman, is the first thing we needed to do was create a different belief system about crying. So identify her belief system, which was unconscious, right? And identify her belief system. Well, she came from a long line of people who believe that you don't show your feelings, and you don't make other people uncomfortable. And if you have a feeling, just don't think about it, don't dwell on it, think about something happy. Right. And that was ingrained in many generations. Well, that is incompatible with healing. So the first meeting her where she's at, the first thing is, well, let's identify your belief system about feelings. And thankfully, she was willing to do that work. If she wasn't willing to do that work, then I have to respect that. But then I also have to say I'm not the right therapist for you, because I don't think that you can unravel what needs to unravel if you don't believe in unraveling.
Right.
Okay.
Just a way to get through it without actually going through it.
Right. So now we have to come up with a new belief system that says, I have a right to exist and I am worth protecting. Those are core beliefs. And if you have a right to exist, and if you are worth protecting, a big part of that means that I have a right to feel what I'm feeling. Right. Feelings don't need to be justified or explained. Feelings are fluid. They're supposed to be fluid. When they become trapped and they stop becoming fluid, that's where trauma has a place to grow inside of your body and your heart and your mind. So we spent a couple of weeks working with the start and the stop. She would start to feel something because she felt safe, because she was with family, but family's not comfortable with displaying emotions. And so we kind of had to sit with that and figure out how that was going to work. So we come up with that new belief system. Then if it's okay to feel, well, then let's figure out, how do we do that in a way that feels safe to you? The trick in working with trauma is you never go digging for it. You always want to start with safety.
That's the part that I think people don't realize.
Before you jump off a cliff, it's good to build a soft place to land.
Yeah.
So remember the bunny story. The bunny did not start to release the tears and the shaking and the gross stuff until it had the felt sense of safety. We start with safety. When you feel safe, the nervous system takes its foot off the brake, and that's when the feelings come. And this is where people get stuck, because they don't understand why they feel bad when everything is okay.
Yeah.
So normalizing that. If you can normalize that, then the rest is very, it's simple but hard. It's simple but painful. I don't want to say it's easy, because it's not easy.
No.
But it's simple. You allow whatever is inside of you to come out. And that's going to look different for everybody. But once you do that, what you're doing is you are releasing the pain, and then the memory becomes integrated and it becomes a part of your past. So for this particular woman, because she was already studying to be a therapist, I I think it took about 2 months before she could sleep through the night. She attempted to share what she was doing with her family, and they couldn't deal with it. That's okay. So then she identified other support people who could support her through this. And over time, she allowed, and that's it really, it's allowing, it's getting out of your own way. You create the containment, you create the belief system, and then you just get out of your own way. And what goes up will naturally come down on its own. And that's how we integrate those fragmented pieces.
There's a lot that
I hope that made sense.
It just bringing it out into a much broader conversation. Obviously we're not going to cover everything related, in 30 minutes. Well, I guess we'd have a few more minutes to, tie in the bigger context of this is, anytime there's a breach of safety and a breach of safety in terms of boundary, of sovereignty, anytime there's a breach of that without some recovery, there's going to be some tension there. So it doesn't have to be something, my point is, it doesn't have to be something as serious as rape.
No.
It can be
Gosh,
boundary
no.
crossing through, emotional pressure, like typical yelling, but also like sort of invasiveness that can have some boundary crossing. And if there's not resolution, then that can do some damage about who am I? Do I have a right to be here? Do I have a fundamental right to take up some space and that kind of thing? And being able to say there's aspects of those kind of breaches that can carry into our human wellness. Different people have different layers of response, and the treatment of it have to do with a multi-angle between individual, their family, their coworkers. Like even something as bad as losing a child, that's a terrible thing. But if your world, particularly the hospital, doesn't respond in a way that is, like we're sorry, then you have the grief, but then you have the response that is like a traumatic. So there's so much complexity to it, and to be able to have a conversation. I feel bad, friend to my friend or to my family, and I feel bad, I don't feel resolved about this. If they're not saying, well, it's not a big deal, you should get over it, they're saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, let's work out how you can figure out what it is that's going on. And really that's part of what we would open up this part of the conversation with. Carla, you're an expert in somatic experiencing and in people who come saying they've had a trauma. So you are able to go to those places and it happens. And yet all of us in the therapy world are learning to be more trauma informed in that what I'm speaking of is the spectrum of a traumatic response. It's very out there, and all of us are needing to be more aware about the sensitivities of this.
The common denominator that you speak of is the sensation of being violated.
Yeah.
And your nervous system does not care about the story,
right,
or how you got violated. But the trauma that we're talking about happens when the violation is not honored and respected.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So people are allowed to make mistakes. I step on people's toes all the time unintentionally. If you're not allowed to make mistakes, then you can't learn anything new.
Right.
But allowing the violation that you feel to have a voice so that you honor it, even if nobody else does, you can still heal if you honor your sense of violation.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, the main thing about working with mood disorders and all things that might contribute to mood disorders is the validation and coming at it very matter of fact. That is a phrase I've used constantly about being very matter of fact about these things and reaching out about what can we do to kind of get some relief. We're going to maybe close this part.
Okay.
And thank you so much for your willingness to
Oh
step
my
in.
gosh, thanks for inviting me.
And then we'll have a discussion after we shut down this part. Hold on, you guys. Hold on just one second. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.